15 Psycho Serial Killers Who Found Love in Prison, Part 2.
If you are brand new to our channel, we invite you to take a moment to subscribe. Just click on the lit red button as well as the gray bell. Why the bell? Well, it will let you know every time we post a new video.
9. Susan Atkins, the Manson family's sexy Sadie. It was in 1967 that Susan Atkins met the manipulative Charles Manson and became a part of his family. She eventually moved in with them to their ranch and, like many others, she fell under the spell of a cult leader. 2 years later, at the prompting of Manson, Atkins was a part of the vicious, murderous group that killed 8 months pregnant Sharon Tate, Stephen Parent, celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, Wojciech Krakowski, and coffee heir Abigail Folger. Tex Watson took Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, and Patricia Krenwinkel to Tate's residence, and the group slaughtered their victims, writing the word pig on the wall in Tate's blood, hoping to incite a race war. The next night Manson sent the group out once more with a few new members to carry out what has gone down in history as the LaBianca murders, where grocery store owner Leno LaBianca and his wife Rosemary were bound, their faces covered with pillowcases, and murdered. Atkins was also implicated in the murder of Gary Hinman, an old friend of Manson's who he believed inherited a large sum of money. She was sentenced to death, but that was later commuted to life in prison. While there, she married cookie multimillionaire Donald Lee Lazier in 1981, but it didn't take long for Atkins to annul the marriage once she learned he wasn't really that rich, and that he's been married 30 or more times. She found love once again with James Whitehouse, a Harvard law student, and they wed in 1987. They remained together until she died of brain cancer in 2009. Out of 10. Ilic Ramirez Sanchez, Carlos the Jackal. Venezuelan terrorist Ilic Ramirez Sanchez is serving a life sentence in France for a number of killings that occurred in the 1970s and 80s. In 1982 he was involved in a bombing in Paris that injured 63 people and killed 1. He was also suspected of being behind a terrorist attack in France that killed 11 people and left 150 other injured. It wasn't until 1997 that he was convicted of murdering 2 French secret agents. He's also accused of being responsible for a grenade attack in Paris back in 1974 that killed 2 people and injured 3 dozen. While defending Ramirez Sanchez, his lawyer Isabel Coutant-Pere fell in love with her client. The feelings were mutual, and the two were married, even though he was still legally married to his second wife. 11. Arthur Shawcross, the Genesee River Killer. In 1972 Arthur Shawcross murdered his first victim. Jack Blake, his 10-year-old neighbor with whom he spent time, lost his life after Shawcross first sexually assaulted him, and then suffocated him to death. Months later 8-year-old Karen Ann Hill went missing, and her body was found under a bridge. Dirt and leaves had been shoved down her throat, and police later found out that she'd also been raped. After an investigation, Shawcross was arrested, tried, and convicted. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, but was released after 12 after prison social workers deemed him no longer a danger to society. Upon his release, Shawcross's urges to rape and kill were magnified. He would troll the streets of Rochester, New York, riding around in his girlfriend's car stalking prostitutes, waiting for his perfect victim. From 1998 to 1990 he murdered 12 women, and all but 1 was a prostitute. He was captured after a surveillance team found him urinating over a bridge, where below his last victim's body lay in the creek. He was given life without the possibility of parole, and while in prison he met and married his longtime love Clara D. Neal. They later divorced. Shawcross died in prison in 2008 of a cardiac arrest. 12. Angel Maturino Resendez, the railroad killer. After using rocks or blunt objects to take his victims' lives, He would then steal their jewelry and send them to his wife, who was back in Mexico. He was arrested after his sister agreed to help the police capture him. Resendez confessed to many of the murders and was found guilty and sentenced to death in 1999. By the year 2000, Nancy began writing him, and the two were married in a prison visitation room in 2001. I'm well educated, middle class. I own my own house. I own my own truck, said Nancy Resendez told the Houston Chronicle. I don't condone anything he's done. But there is a human being in there, and I just happen to love that human being. Because Resendez was technically still married to his wife in Mexico and he and his new wife didn't get a marriage license, the Resendez's marriage wasn't legally recognized. He was executed by lethal injection in 2006. 13. Juana Barraza, the old lady killer. Former Mexican professional wrestler Juana Barraza was a tough opponent, but it was her activities outside of the ring that could really put fear in you. Known as the Old Lady Killer, Barraza has gone down in infamy as being a ruthless serial killer who is responsible for the deaths of about 40 elderly women. She told police that she specifically targeted older women because of her resentment toward her mother. Barraza was found guilty of burglary and 16 counts of murder and given 759 years in jail, although by Mexican law the most she could serve is 60 years. You'd think that love and marriage would be out of the question for Barraza, but you'd be mistaken. After serving 9 years in prison, she and another prisoner, 74-year-old murderer Miguel Angel, exchanged vows behind bars with 48 other couples. The couple had reportedly been dating for a year before they decided to make their prison love official. 14. Philip Jablonski, the power killer. Nearly every woman who crossed paths with Philip Jablonski would live to regret the relationship, that is, if they lived at all. The rapist and killer grew up watching his father physically abuse and sodomize his sisters, and as he got older, adopted some of dear old dad's tendencies. He married his first wife, Alice, in 1968, but she soon left him after he, while having sex with her, put a pillow over her face and tried to suffocate her. He met his girlfriend Jane right around the time that Alice left him. He raped her on their first date, but she didn't tell anyone. She left him in 1972, and by 1977, he was with Linda. The two had a daughter, but Linda soon left him after he admitted to almost raping her mother, but when she returned to get things for their baby, Jablonski killed her. He was found guilty of Linda's murder and spent 12 years in prison. While inside in 1982, he placed a newspaper ad asking for a pimple, and Carol Spadoni soon answered. The two were married while he was locked up, and upon his release, he moved in with his wife. On April 22, 1991, he shot and raped 38-year-old Fatima Van, carving "I Love Jesus" into her back and removing her eyes and ears. The very next day, he killed his wife and her mother, Eva Peterson. Carol was suffocated with duct tape, shot, and stabbed to death. He was sentenced to death and is currently still on death row. 15. Randall Woodfield, the I-5 killer. Interstate 5 along the California, Oregon, and Washington coasts was the stalking ground for serial rapist and killer Randall Woodfield. His victims were aged 14 to 37, and while investigators linked him to 18 crimes, it's suspected that there are many more that he's responsible for. He kidnapped, beat, shot, and violently sexually violated his victims from 1979 to 1981. This from a man who was picked up by the Green Bay Packers in the 17th round of the 1974 draft. He was sentenced to life in prison and is being held at the Oregon State Penitentiary. His horrific history should be enough to keep anyone away from this man, but surprisingly Woodfield has been married 3 times and divorced twice while behind bars. Back in 2006 he had a MySpace account that was created and monitored by his friends and family because he doesn't have internet access in prison. His profile read, "I'm Randy, I'm 55. I spend the remainder of my days in prison because I have committed a murder along with many other crimes. I once tried out for the Green Bay Packers. The only reason I didn't make it is because the skills I had to offer they didn't need at the time. Apparently the ladies just couldn't resist.